The frontier town of Dry Creek was buried under snow, its streets ghostly and still. Winter had a way of silencing everything here. The rattle of the saloon doors, the barking of strays, even the rowdy voices that usually carried past midnight. But this night, nothing moved. Nothing but the wind. At the far edge of town, the forge still glowed faintly. Inside sat Eli, the blacksmith, hunched by the dying fire. His beard had gone gray, his shoulders bent from years of the anvil. The war had taken his only son, and with him, any reason to smile. The forge was all he had left, and even that seemed to mock him, every hammer, every tool a reminder of hands that should have carried on his craft. He puffed at a pipe that had gone cold hours ago, staring into the embers. Silence pressed heavy against his chest. It was the silence of loss, of a man who had outlived his family, his purpose, his time. Then came the knock, sharp, urgent, hammering at the heavy oak door. Eli froze. Visitors never came this late, not in a storm. He reached instinctively for the iron poker by the fire, more weapon than tool now. The knock came again, harder this time, rattling the hinges. He growled through the silence, voice rough from disuse. "Who's there?" For a moment, only the storm answered. Then a voice slipped through the wind, thin, shaking, desperate. "Please, help me." Eli's jaw clenched. He could have ignored it. Should have. Strangers brought trouble, and he'd buried enough trouble to last a lifetime. But there was something in that voice, a rawness, a fear, that pulled at him. Against better judgment, he lifted the latch. Snow blasted inside as the door creaked open. And there, shivering on the threshold, stood a boy. No older than 12, with a mop of dark hair matted by frost. His coat was torn, far too thin for the storm. His lips were cracked blue, his knees buckled under him. One look and Eli knew. If he left him outside, the boy wouldn't last another hour. "Please," the boy whispered again. With a curse under his breath, Eli seized his arm and pulled him inside. The boy collapsed by the hearth, crouching close to the embers, his small frame rattled by shivers. Eli threw more wood onto the fire, coaxing reluctant flames to life. Slowly, light spread across the forge. That was when he saw them. The boots. Eli's breath caught. His eyes narrowed, his chest tightened as though an anvil pressed down on it. Those boots weren't ordinary, they were his. His craftsmanship. Every stitch, every seam, every curve of leather was his work. Years ago, he had forged them for his son. Boots made to last, made with pride. But his son was gone. Buried in a soldier's grave. Those boots had been lowered into the earth with him. Yet here they were, on the feet of a stranger. Eli's hand tightened on the poker until his knuckles went white. His voice came low, dangerous. "Where did you get those?" The boy, still trembling, looked down at his feet as though seeing them for the first time. He didn't answer. Eli stepped closer, shadow looming across the boy's fragile frame. He repeated, harsher, "Those boots. Where?" The boy's lips parted, but no sound came. His wide eyes glistened in the firelight, filled with both fear and something else, something unreadable. At last, he whispered, "They were given to me." "By who?" The boy's gaze dropped again. Silence. Eli's heart pounded, torn between rage and disbelief. Every memory of his son came rushing back. The day he'd finished those boots, the laughter in this very forge, the letter in black ribbon that had followed, the coffin lowered into the ground. He had buried those boots. He had buried his son. And now, here sat a stranger wearing both. The fire crackled, filling the silence between them. The boy pressed closer to the warmth, his thin shoulders shaking. "Thank you," he murmured, barely audible. Eli didn't answer. He stood rigid, staring at the impossible sight before him. Outside, the storm screamed against the windows. Inside, another storm gathered. One not of wind or snow, but of memory and suspicion. Whatever truth this boy carried, it had found its way to Eli's door. And it would not leave quietly. Right finger if you enjoy mysterious Wild West stories. Hit that like button and subscribe so you won't miss the next chapter. Morning came slow to Dry Creek, gray light slipping through shutters half buried in snow. Inside the forge, Eli had barely slept. He sat hunched at the table, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee gone cold, eyes fixed on the boy curled up on a makeshift cot near the embers. The boy stirred with a start, eyes flickering open as though even in sleep he had not known peace. For a moment he looked ready to bolt. Then he saw Eli's stern figure watching, and he froze. "Get up," Eli said gruffly. The boy obeyed, his movements stiff, cautious. He shuffled to the fire, holding out his hands toward the flames. "Name?" Eli demanded. The boy kept his eyes low. Don't remember." Eli snorted. "Every child remembers his own name." Silence. The boy pressed his lips together and stared at the fire. Eli studied him, thin frame, dirt smudging his face, clothes torn at the seams. He looked like someone who had walked too far and eaten too little. But the boots still gnawed at Eli's mind. They were too fine for a boy like this. Too personal. He rose suddenly, his chair scraping across the wooden floor. The boy flinched. Eli crossed the room, seized the boy's chin with his rough hand, and forced him to look up. Those eyes, dark, defiant even in fear, met his own. "You listen to me," Eli growled. "Those boots belong to my son. He's been in the ground 3 years. You tell me how they ended up on your feet, or so help me." The boy jerked free, stumbling back, his voice breaking. "I said, I don't know. They were given to me." "By who?" Eli barked. The boy's mouth opened, then shut again. His fists clenched at his sides. He said nothing. Eli's anger surged, but beneath it was something more dangerous, doubt. Could it be? Could his son have? No. He'd buried the coffin with his own hands. He had seen the boots lowered into the earth. This boy could not be anything but a thief, a liar, or worse, bait sent by someone who knew Eli's grief too well. The forge fell quiet again, broken only by the hiss of burning wood. The boy's shoulders sagged, his breathing shaky. He looked less like a liar and more like a lost soul. Eli sighed heavily, setting a loaf of bread and a strip of dried meat on the table. "Eat," he muttered. The boy hesitated, then obeyed, tearing into the food with the hunger of someone who hadn't eaten in days. His hands trembled as he held the bread, crumbs scattering across the table. Eli watched, suspicion still sharp but softened by something he refused to name. When the boy finished, Eli asked, "Where were you headed before you found this forge?" The boy wiped his mouth with his sleeve. His voice was low, almost inaudible. "Nowhere. Everyone's headed somewhere," Eli said flatly. Again, silence. Frustration boiled in him. But even as anger pressed at his chest, Eli remembered another boy, his own, sitting at this very table years ago, stubborn in silence after being caught in some childish mischief. That memory twisted the knife deeper. The boy yawned suddenly, exhaustion overtaking hunger. He swayed on the bench, eyes heavy. Eli almost barked at him to stay awake, but he didn't. Instead, he let him lean against the table, drifting into uneasy sleep. Eli's gaze dropped to the boots again. Firelight glinted off worn leather. They were real, solid, not memory, not dream. He reached out, tracing the edge of the stitching with a finger, the weight of memory pressing down. His throat tightened. He could still recall the day he'd made them. His son standing tall, grinning at the perfect fit. Pride had burned brighter than any forge fire that day. Now they sat on a stranger's feet. Eli's fists clenched. Whoever this boy was, he carried answers. And Eli would have them, whether the boy spoke them freely, or not at all. The storm outside had passed, but inside the forge, a darker one gathered. The days after the storm settled into uneasy rhythm. The boy lingered in the forge like a shadow, sweeping ash from the floor, fetching wood, always keeping his distance from Eli's sharp eyes. He spoke little, answering questions with shrugs or silence. But the boots never left his feet, and with each glance at them Eli felt the same stab of grief and suspicion. Dry Creek was quick to notice the boy. Neighbors passing by slowed their steps, glancing through the forge windows at the unfamiliar figure. Whispers stirred at the saloon, where gossip was as common as whiskey. Eli ignored them, but he knew how this town worked, nothing stayed secret for long. One night, when the boy finally slept on the cot by the fire, Eli sat at the table, staring at the boots once more. The crackle of the forge gnawed at him, each spark a reminder. He needed answers. He rose quietly, moving to the small satchel the boy kept near his bed. It was a worn canvas bag, patched in places, far too small to hold much. Eli hesitated. Searching a child's belongings was a low act. But the weight of memory crushed him, and he untied the strap. Inside were scraps of cloth, a dull pocket knife, and a bundle of papers tied with string. Most were blank, salvaged sheets, worthless. But one fragment stopped him cold. It was burned along the edges, the paper brittle, as if rescued from fire. Faded ink stretched across it in hurried strokes. Eli's breath caught in his chest. He knew that handwriting, his son's. The words were faint, but enough to sting. If this reaches you, trust only the forge. That was all. The rest was gone, eaten by flame. Eli sat down hard, the letter fragment trembling in his hands. His son had been dead 3 years. He had buried him, mourned him, cursed the heavens for taking him. And yet here, in his forge, lay words written after death. The boy stirred. His eyes blinked open, locking instantly on the fragment in Eli's grip. He bolted upright, panic flashing across his face. "Where did you get that?" Eli demanded, voice rough. The boy's lips parted, but no words came. "Don't play games, boy." Eli slammed the paper onto the table, ash scattering. "This is my son's hand. I'd stake my forge on it. Where did you get it?" The boy trembled. His gaze flicked toward the boots, then back to Eli's hard stare. His voice came soft, cracked with fear. It was given to me." "By who?" Eli pressed. Silence. The boy shook his head, his small fists clenching. "I can't." Eli's rage surged. He slammed his fist against the table, rattling the tools nearby. "You will." Tears welled in the boy's eyes, but he didn't back down. His jaw tightened with stubborn defiance. Finally, he whispered. "Before he died, he told me to find you." The room fell silent. The words echoed against the timber walls, settling like smoke. Eli stared at him, his breath heavy, his mind torn between disbelief and hope he dared not feel. "What did you say?" he rasped. The boy swallowed hard. "Your son. He told me, before he died. He said, find my father. Show him the truth." Eli's world tilted. His son's coffin, the burial, the boots, it all clashed with this impossible claim. Could his son have survived long enough to write, to speak, to entrust this boy with his final words? The forge fire hissed, throwing sparks that danced like ghosts. Eli gripped the fragment again, staring at the words. Trust only the forge. His son had left him a warning, and this boy carried it like a torch through the dark. But why him? Why this child? Eli's jaw clenched. Answers were coming, whether the boy was ready to give them or not. And somewhere out there, beyond the reach of the fire, someone else knew the truth too. Someone who wanted it buried in ashes. The forge had barely returned to its usual rhythm when trouble walked through its door. It was late afternoon, the snow outside reflecting pale sunlight into the room. Eli stood at the anvil, hammering out a horseshoe, while the boy swept in silence. The steady clang of iron echoed like a heartbeat. Then the noise was broken, not by the hammer, but by a heavy knock at the forge door. Eli stiffened. The boy froze mid-sweep, his knuckles whitening around the broom handle. The knock came again, slower this time, deliberate. Eli set the hammer down and crossed the room. He opened the door, and the cold rushed in along with a man who filled the threshold. Tall, broad, his face scarred with jagged lines that carved across his cheek and brow. His eyes were pale, almost colorless, sharp as shards of ice. A battered coat hung heavy on his shoulders, snow clinging to its seams. "Afternoon," the man said. His voice was rough, carrying the weight of too many fights. "I hear you've got company." Eli blocked the doorway with his frame. "Depends who's asking." The man stepped forward without waiting for invitation. His boots thudded against the wooden floor as his gaze swept the room. When his eyes landed on the boy, a smile crept across his face, but it was the kind of smile that chilled rather than warmed. "There you are," he drawled. "Knew you'd end up here." The boy recoiled, stumbling back toward the hearth. Eli's grip tightened around the doorframe. "State your business." The man reached into his coat. Eli's hand went instinctively to the hammer at his belt, but the stranger pulled out nothing more than a folded paper. He tossed it onto the anvil with a thud. "That's my business." Eli picked it up. His eyes narrowed. It was a document of guardianship, stamped with the sheriff's seal, naming the boy as a ward. "He belongs to me," the scarred man said. "Ran off weeks ago. Took something that wasn't his." The boy's voice rang sharp, desperate. "He's lying. Don't listen to him." Eli studied the paper again. The seal looked real, but something about the handwriting gnawed at him. The signature wasn't the sheriff's usual hand. He had seen Amos Grady's scrawl enough times on tax slips and town postings. "You forged this," Eli said flatly. The scarred man's grin widened. "You call it forge? The law'll call it binding. And the sheriff will back me when I bring him proof. Eli folded the paper, tossing it back. Not from my forge you won't. The man's expression hardened. He stepped closer, his pale eyes inches from Eli's. You stand in my way, Smith, you'll regret it. Eli didn't flinch. You've already given me reason. For a long moment, the two men stared each other down, silence thick as smoke. The only sound was the boy's ragged breathing. Finally, the scarred man chuckled, low and cruel. He turned to leave, his boots grinding against the floor. At the door, he paused. I'll be back, and next time, I won't come alone. When he was gone, the forge seemed darker. Eli shut the door firmly, the echo reverberating through the timber walls. He turned to find the boy trembling, tears shining in his eyes. Please, the boy whispered. Don't let him take me. Eli stared at him, torn between suspicion and instinct. The boots, the letter, the stranger's papers, all of it pulled him in different directions. But one truth had settled in his chest. Whoever this boy was, he was now under Eli's roof. And that meant he was Eli's responsibility. The fire hissed as Eli stoked it higher. Whatever storm had been brewing in Dry Creek had just reached his forge. And soon, it would break. By the next morning, all of Dry Creek knew. Whispers spread faster than snowmelt, spilling from the saloon to the general store and back again. Eli the blacksmith was hiding a boy, and a scarred drifter had come looking for him. Eli didn't care for whispers. He cared even less for the stares that followed him when he stepped out for coal. But he knew what was coming, long before he heard the familiar creak of boots outside his forge. The sheriff had arrived. Amos Grady was a man built more of whiskey than law, but he carried his badge with the weight of 30 years. His duster coat dragged against the floorboards as he entered the forge, his hat dripping melted snow. He nodded to Eli, though the nod carried no warmth. Morning, Amos said, his voice slow, even. We need to talk. Eli set down his hammer, wiping soot from his hands. I suppose we do. The boy sat near the fire, stiff as a trapped rabbit. Amos's gaze lingered on him before shifting back to Eli. Stranger came to me last night, the sheriff said. Brought papers. Said the boy was his. They're false, Eli replied flatly. Amos shrugged. Maybe not. Seal looked real enough. And the law doesn't much like to argue with a seal. Eli's jaw clenched. You've seen his kind before. You know what he is. What I know, Amos said, is that my job's keeping order. And order says a dispute like this don't belong in fists or in whispers. It belongs in law. He spat into the forge fire, where the hiss echoed sharp. So here it is plain. You got a week. 7 days to prove the boy doesn't belong to that man. Otherwise, I'll have to hand him over. The boy's eyes went wide. He shot up from the bench. No, you can't. Eli stepped forward, placing himself between the sheriff and the boy. And if I refuse? Amos's face hardened. Then you're standing against the law. And Eli, you know I don't want to make that mistake with you. But I will. Silence fell heavy. The fire popped. Outside, wind howled through cracks in the shutters. Finally, Amos adjusted his hat. 7 days. That's generous. Don't waste them. He turned and left, the door slamming shut behind him. The forge seemed smaller once he was gone, as though the walls had closed in. The boy's breathing came ragged, his fists clenched. He'll take me, he whispered. Eli stared at the door, fury simmering under his skin. Not if I can help it. The boy looked up at him, confusion and hope flickering in equal measure. Why? You don't even know me. Eli's eyes drifted to the boots, then to the charred fragment of the letter still tucked in his pocket. His voice came low. No, but I knew the man who wore those boots first. And until I have answers, no one lays a hand on you. The boy swallowed, blinking back tears. Eli stoked the fire, sparks leaping into the air. 7 days. 7 days to tear through lies, to unravel papers stamped with false seals, to learn why his dead son's handwriting had found its way into a stranger's satchel. And 7 days before the law itself would come knocking. The hammer weighed heavy at Eli's side, but heavier still was the truth pressing down on him. If he failed, the boy would be dragged into the hands of a man who spoke only in threats. If he succeeded, it might mean uncovering secrets he wasn't ready to face. Either way, the countdown had begun. The days that followed dragged like iron across stone. Eli worked the forge by daylight, but his mind was elsewhere, turning over the scarred man's threats, the sheriff's ultimatum, and the burned letter that lay folded in his pocket. Each strike of the hammer seemed to echo with the same question. What truth had his son tried to leave behind? The boy stayed close, sweeping, fetching wood, helping where he could. Sometimes Eli caught him staring toward the window as if expecting someone, dread heavy in his young eyes. Other times, the boy asked about iron, the tools, the craft. Eli answered gruffly, but the boy listened with a hunger that reminded him too much of another boy long gone. It was near midnight when the storm broke. The wind howled against the shutters, rattling them in their frames. Eli stirred the fire, coaxing flame back to life, when he heard it, footsteps outside. Too many. Too heavy. His hand shot to the hammer at his belt. He gestured sharply to the boy. Stay behind me. The back door shuddered under a sudden blow. Then another. Wood splintered. Eli braced as the door burst open and shadows spilled inside. 2, 3, maybe more men, their faces half covered by scarves against the storm. The first lunged, but Eli swung his hammer hard, striking the man square in the chest and sending him sprawling across the floor. Sparks erupted as the impact knocked tools from the bench. The boy screamed as another intruder seized his arm. Eli roared, swinging again, the hammer catching the man's shoulder. He staggered back, releasing his grip. Chaos erupted. Iron clattered, wood cracked, sparks leapt from the fire as the bellows toppled. Snow blasted inside, dousing the flames until the forge went dark. Eli swung blindly in the dim, his hammer striking air, then flesh. Grunts and curses filled the night. The boy scrambled, slipping on the icy floor, his cries swallowed by the storm. Then, just as suddenly as it began, it was over. The shadows fled into the snow, their shapes vanishing into the blizzard. The door hung broken on its hinges, the fire smothered into nothing but ash. Breath ragged, Eli stood in the dark, hammer slick in his hands. The forge was silent, colder than it had ever been. "Boy?" he called. Silence. He stumbled forward, searching, his boots crunching over scattered tools. The cot by the hearth was empty. The boy was gone. Eli's chest clenched. He shoved the broken door open, stepping into the storm. Snow stung his face, wind cutting like knives. He squinted into the night, and there, faint in the drifts, he saw them. Tracks. Small footprints, weaving through the snow. And beside them, larger prints, heavier, purposeful. They had taken him. Eli's grip tightened on the hammer until his knuckles ached. Rage surged in him hotter than any forge fire. Whoever those men were, whatever truth they tried to bury, they had just declared war. The forge lay behind him in ruin, its fire dead. But Eli knew one thing. The fire inside him had only just been lit. The forge lay silent behind him, its fire drowned by storm and ash. But in the snow outside, a new fire burned in Eli's chest. He stood beneath the weight of the night, hammer clutched tight, eyes fixed on the footprints that cut across the drifts. Small ones first, light, uneven, the boys. Beside them, heavier tracks pressed deep into the white. Men's boots. At least 2, maybe 3. They led away from town, toward the low hills that rose dark against the pale horizon. The wind bit at his face, stung his eyes, but Eli followed. Dry Creek slept behind shuttered windows, oblivious to the storm and the chase. The sheriff would hear of this soon enough, Eli thought. But Amos Grady moved slow, and Eli would not wait 7 days to act. The boy was taken from his forge. That made it Eli's fight. Snow swallowed sound, leaving only the crunch of his boots and the whistle of the wind. Each step sank deep, but he pressed on, eyes never leaving the tracks. His breath came heavy, clouding before him. Hours passed. The tracks wound through fields where barbed wire stuck out like the bones of cattle long gone. They cut across a frozen creek, then climbed toward a ridge. The storm thinned, leaving the sky bruised with fading clouds. A pale moon cast faint light across the snow. Halfway up the ridge, Eli stopped. He crouched, running a calloused hand over the prints. The boy's steps faltered here, dragging as though his strength had failed. The larger boots pressed harder, pulling him forward. A growl rumbled in Eli's chest. He pressed on. At the ridge's crest, the land dropped into a gorge. A jagged scar carved by a river now frozen solid. The tracks led straight across the ice. Eli stared down, his breath slowing. The gorge was treacherous. One misstep could send man and boy both into the black water below. He tested the ice with his boot. It groaned but held. Then a sound cut through the wind. A cry, thin, desperate, echoing from the far side. The boy. Eli's heart slammed against his ribs. He stepped onto the ice, each bootfall cracking faintly. The gorge swallowed him in silence as he pressed forward, hammer tight at his side. Snow whipped around him, but he saw them now, shadows ahead. The boy's small figure near the cliff wall. And looming over him, one of the men. Tall, broad-shouldered, unmistakable. The scarred man. His pale eyes caught the moonlight, glinting cold as steel. One hand gripped the boy's arm, holding him fast. Eli's breath came harsh, visible in the frozen air. His hammer felt heavier, but his resolve burned hot. The scarred man's voice carried across the gorge, low and cruel. "I told you I'd be back." Eli took another step, the ice groaning beneath him. "And I told you, he's not yours." The gorge held its breath, silence stretching thin. Snow whispered across the frozen river. The boy's wide eyes darted between the two men, trapped between past and present. Eli moved forward, each step deliberate, each crack in the ice echoing the truth. This would end here. Right finger, the trail has led to the gorge. Want to see what happens when Eli faces the scarred man? Hit like and subscribe so you don't miss the showdown. The frozen river stretched wide between them, a mirror of cracked glass beneath Eli's boots. Each step forward echoed through the gorge, ice groaning under his weight. The scarred man stood tall on the far bank, one hand clutching the boy by the shoulder, the other hovering near his coat as though ready to draw steel. The boy struggled, eyes wide with fear, but the man's grip held firm. His pale eyes glittered coldly in the moonlight. "You've been keeping what's mine, Smith," he called across the ice. "Time to hand him over." Eli's hammer hung at his side, heavy but certain. His voice carried steady across the gorge. "He's no one's to own." The scarred man's grin was sharp, mocking. "That so? Papers say otherwise. Sheriff'll back me. You got 6 days left, old man. Why waste your breath?" Eli stepped closer. The ice cracked beneath him, a jagged line racing outward. He didn't stop. "Your papers are forged, and law or no law, I won't let you drag him back to hell." The scarred man chuckled, but it was hollow. He yanked the boy forward, forcing him to stumble. "Then come take him, if you think you can." The boy cried out, "Eli." His voice cracked through the night, raw with desperation. Eli's chest tightened, but his steps didn't falter. He crossed the midpoint of the river, where cracks webbed beneath the surface. The wind cut sharp through the gorge, snow swirling like ash. The scarred man pulled a knife from his coat, its blade catching a sliver of moonlight. He pressed it near the boy, not close enough to wound, but close enough to threaten. One more step and the ice thundered under Eli's boot as he advanced another pace. His hammer rose slowly, steel gleaming against the night. His voice dropped to a growl. "You won't touch him." For a moment, time froze. The boy's breath came in sharp gasps, the scarred man's blade hovered, Eli's hammer poised. The gorge seemed to hold its breath. Then chaos erupted. The boy twisted violently, stomping hard on the scarred man's boot. The man cursed, jerking back. In that instant, Eli surged forward. His hammer swung in a brutal arc, smashing against the man's forearm. The knife flew from his grip, clattering across the ice. The scarred man roared, shoving the boy aside. Eli planted himself between them, chest heaving, hammer raised again. The ice beneath them screamed, cracks splitting wide, water shifting below. All three froze, their weight threatening to break the surface. The scarred man staggered back, clutching his arm, pale eyes burning with hate. "This isn't over, Smith," he spat. "You think you've won, but you don't know what that boy carries." Eli's jaw tightened. "Then I'll find out." The man snarled, twisted into something darker, a promise. Then, with a final glare, he retreated into the shadows of the gorge, his figure swallowed by snow and night. Silence fell, broken only by the hiss of wind. Eli turned to the boy, who sat trembling against the cliff wall, tears freezing on his cheeks. He reached out a hand. "You're safe now." The boy took it, clutching tight as Eli pulled him to his feet. The ice groaned beneath them, urging haste. Together, they made their way to the far bank, each step a prayer against collapse. When they reached solid ground, Eli let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The boy leaned against him, exhausted but alive. For now, because the scarred man's words echoed in his mind, You don't know what that boy carries. The forge might give warmth, the sheriff might give deadlines, but Eli knew one thing. The real fight was only beginning. The forge's fire had burned low by the time Eli and the boy returned. Snow clung to their coats, boots soaked from the frozen gorge, breaths ragged from the run. Eli stoked the coals back to life, feeding them wood until sparks leapt high. The boy sat hunched near the heat, shivering, his face pale and drawn. For a long time, neither spoke. The only sound was the steady crackle of fire, the hiss of melting snow dripping onto stone. Eli leaned against the anvil, hammer still hanging at his side. His eyes stayed fixed on the boy, on the boots, on the satchel, on the questions gnawing through him. Finally, he broke the silence. What did he mean? The scarred man. He said you're carrying something. The boy swallowed hard, his gaze fixed on the flames. He hesitated, lips trembling as though the truth weighed heavier than his thin shoulders could bear. Eli stepped closer. His voice softened, though steel still edged it. I pulled you from that gorge. You owe me answers. The boy flinched but nodded. Slowly, he reached for the satchel at his side. Fingers fumbling, he untied the fraying cord and pulled out the charred fragments Eli had already seen. Then, deeper in the bag, he drew another piece of paper, creased, stained, nearly falling apart. Eli's breath caught as he unfolded it. It was a letter. A full page, though scorched at the corners. The handwriting leapt off the page. His son's hand, no mistake. Father, if this finds you, know that I did not fall as the others believe. I uncovered something they would kill to hide. The men with scars, the ones who carry forged papers, they serve a hand higher than law. Trust only the forge. If I cannot return, the boy will. Protect him, as you would me. The words blurred before Eli's eyes. His hand trembled as he held the page closer to the firelight, reading and rereading every line. The boy's voice broke into the silence, barely more than a whisper. He gave it to me. The night he stopped, swallowing hard. The night he didn't come back. Eli's chest heaved. Memories of his son, the coffin, the burial, the grief, clashed violently with the words in his hands. Could it be? Had the boy lived long enough to entrust this child with his final plea? Eli lowered himself onto the bench, letter clutched tight. Why you? Why would he choose you? The boy's eyes brimmed with tears. Because I was there. Because I saw. He saved me when no one else would. And before it ended, he told me to find you. Said you'd know what to do. Eli's head bowed. The fire popped, sparks flying, shadows stretching long across the forge. For 3 years he had lived with the certainty of death, the weight of loss. Now that certainty cracked like thin ice, revealing something far more dangerous, hope. Hope that his son's last breath had not been silence. Hope that the fight was not finished. He lifted his eyes, locking them on the boy. Then listen close. If my son trusted you with this, you're no longer just a stray at my door. You're under my roof, my forge, my protection. The boy's tears spilled, but a flicker of relief crossed his face. He nodded quickly, clutching the satchel tight. Eli folded the letter, tucking it deep inside his coat. He stood, gripping the hammer with renewed strength. They'll come again, he said, his voice steady as iron. The scarred man, the law, may be worse. But they won't take you. Not while I still draw breath. The boy whispered, but they'll kill you. Eli's jaw tightened. Let them try. The forge roared, sparks rising as though the very fire understood. Truth had been revealed, forged in ashes and carried by a boy. Now it burned bright, unyielding, ready for the hammer's next strike. Dawn broke over Dry Creek with pale light, the storm finally spent. Smoke rose weakly from chimneys across town, but at the edge, where Eli's forge stood battered from the night's attack, a stronger fire had begun to burn. Eli fed the bellows, coaxing flame into a roar. The boy worked beside him, clumsy but determined, his small hands blackened with soot. For the first time since the night he'd appeared, his shoulders didn't sag with fear. There was weight still, but now it was shared. The letter lay folded deep in Eli's coat. Its words pulsed in his mind. Trust only the forge. Protect him, as you would me. He felt them with every breath, every strike, as though his son's hand still guided his own. By midday, the sheriff arrived. Amos Grady stood in the doorway, the brim of his hat shadowing his eyes. He looked from Eli to the boy, then to the fire raging behind them. You know I've still got law to answer to, Amos said, voice low. Eli set his hammer down, stepping forward. He pulled the charred letters from his coat and laid them on the anvil. "There's your law. Read it." The sheriff frowned, scanning the fragments, the familiar scrawl. His face hardened. If this is true, there's more than one man in Dry Creek with blood on his hands. That scarred devil wasn't working alone. Eli nodded once. "Then it's your choice, stand with them, or stand with me." For a long moment, Amos said nothing. Then he folded the papers, tucking them inside his coat. 7 days won't mean much now. I'll hold the law back as long as I can. But know this, Eli, the storm's bigger than one boy. Bigger than you. Eli's voice was steady as iron. "Then let it come." The sheriff gave a weary nod and left, boots crunching on snow. The forge quieted again, save for the crackle of fire and the steady rhythm of hammer against steel. The boy worked the bellows, sweat beading on his brow despite the cold. He looked at Eli, hesitant. "Why are you doing this? You could have sent me away." Eli paused mid-strike, lifting his eyes to the boy. In him, he saw traces of another, different face, different blood, but the same spark his son had carried. A spark of defiance, of survival, of truth. "Because," Eli said, "you carry more than you know. And because my son asked me to." The boy's eyes glistened. He nodded, lips pressing tight. As the day waned, townsfolk gathered quietly outside, watching smoke rise from the forge. Whispers spread again, but they were different now. Some curious, some fearful, some hopeful. None dared step inside. Inside, the forge glowed bright, throwing shadows long across the walls. Eli guided the boy's hand as they struck the iron together. Sparks flew, showering the dark with light. Each strike rang out like a vow. That the forge would not fall silent again. That truth would not stay buried in ashes, that blood or not, family could be forged anew. When the iron cooled and the fire dimmed, Eli sat heavy on the bench. The boy leaned against the anvil, exhausted but smiling faintly for the first time. Outside, snow still blanketed the town. But inside the forge, there was warmth, hard-won, fragile, but real. Eli looked at the boy, his voice rough but certain. "From this day on, you're not alone. Not while this forge still burns." The boy's smile grew, small but steady. "Then I'll help keep it burning." The blacksmith nodded, a rare glimmer of peace touching his eyes. For years, he had known only loss, only silence. Now, with the hammer's strike and the fire's roar, he had found something new. Not the son he had lost, but a tomorrow worth fighting for. If this story struck you like the hammer's blow, don't forget to like and subscribe for more Wild West mysteries.